Sarah Collins wiped down the cracked vinyl booth for the third time in 10 minutes, her shoulders aching from the double shift that would stretch until dawn. The fluorescent lights above Mel's diner buzzed with that familiar electric hum that had become the soundtrack to her life for the past 6 years. Outside the grease-stained windows, Chicago's South Side sprawled in all its broken glory, where neon signs flickered promises of cheap liquor and cheaper thrills. The register held exactly $47.38 in tips from the past 8 hours. Sarah knew because she had counted 3 times. Every quarter mattered when you were buying Danny's medication with pocket change and hoping the landlord would accept another late payment excuse. Danny, her 80-year-old brother, sat in the corner booth, working on his homework with the intense concentration that had defined him since the car accident stole their parents and his voice. The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response that might fade with time and therapy they could never afford. Sarah called it her daily reminder that she was all he had left in a world that seemed determined to take everything away from broken families like theirs. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see a man she had never encountered before. He was Korean, probably in his 30s, with the kind of expensive suit that seemed out of place in a diner where the coffee was 75 cents and the pie came with a warning about questionable expiration dates. His dark eyes swept the restaurant with the calculated precision of someone accustomed to evaluating threats and opportunities. I wonder if you're watching this from somewhere just as late at night as Sarah's shift, somewhere you know what it feels like to count every dollar and hope tomorrow brings something better. Comment below and let me know what city you're watching from tonight. The stranger chose the corner booth diagonal from Danny, sliding into the worn seat with fluid grace. Sarah grabbed the coffee pot and approached, noting how his hands remained visible on the table and his back stayed straight against the booth. Everything about him suggested control, power, and perhaps danger. "Good evening," she said, forcing warmth into her voice despite her exhaustion. "Can I get you something to eat tonight?" "Black coffee," he replied, his accent subtle but unmistakable. His eyes moved from her face to Danny, then back again with an expression she could not quite read. Sarah poured the coffee, aware that he continued watching her every movement. The late-night crowd at Mel's usually consisted of truckers, drug dealers conducting business over pancakes, and working girls grabbing coffee between clients. This man belonged to none of those categories, yet something about his stillness suggested he might be more dangerous than all of them combined. She returned to wiping tables, but felt his gaze following her. When Jerry Kowalski stumbled in drunk and looking for trouble, grabbing at her uniform and demanding she sit on his lap, Sarah handled it with the firm boundaries she had perfected over years of late-night service. "Sir, you need to keep your hands to yourself and treat everyone here with respect," she told Jerry, stepping back just far enough to avoid his reach, but close enough to show she was not intimidated. "If you want coffee, you can order it politely. Otherwise, you need to leave." Jerry cursed and made another grab for her, but stopped suddenly when the Korean stranger stood up. He had not said a word or made any threatening gesture, but something in his posture caused Jerry to reconsider his choices. The drunk man mumbled an apology and shuffled out into the night. "Thank you," Sarah said to the stranger, who had already returned to his seat without acknowledging the interaction. For the next 2 hours, he sat nursing his single cup of coffee while Sarah served the parade of desperate humanity that populated Chicago's forgotten hours. She watched him watching her, noting how his attention sharpened whenever someone new entered, how his hand moved slightly toward his jacket when the drug dealers got too loud, how his expression softened when Danny looked up from his homework and offered a shy wave. Sarah had learned to read people during her years working nights in a rough neighborhood. This man was dangerous, but not to her. He was evaluating something, making calculations she could not understand, but his danger pointed outward like a shield rather than inward like a weapon. When her shift supervisor called in sick, leaving Sarah alone for the final 3 hours, she noticed the stranger's vigilance increase. He positioned himself with clear sight lines to both the front door and the kitchen entrance. His coffee had grown cold hours ago, but he made no move to leave. Danny fell asleep over his math problems around 4 in the morning. Sarah gently moved his books aside and covered him with her jacket, whispering that she loved him and everything would be okay. The words felt like a prayer she was not sure anyone was listening to. The stranger rose as the first hints of dawn touched the windows. He approached the counter where Sarah was counting the night's meager tips, moving with that same controlled grace she had noticed all evening. "Your check," she said, pulling out the receipt for his single coffee. He placed exact change on the counter, $3.15, no tip. Sarah felt a familiar sting of disappointment, but kept her expression neutral. Tips meant groceries, medicine, and the difference between keeping the lights on or sitting in darkness. "Thank you for the coffee," he said, then paused. "You take good care of him." Sarah looked toward Danny, still sleeping peacefully in the booth. "He's all I have left," she replied, unsure why she was sharing such personal information with a stranger. The man nodded once, then walked toward the door. Sarah noticed he had left something on his table, a white cloth napkin folded neatly beside his empty cup. She approached to clear the table, expecting to find nothing more than coffee stains. Instead, she found dark spots on the napkin that looked disturbingly like dried blood, and words written in the same dark substance that would change everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, and the dangerous world that had been circling her like sharks in dark water. The napkin felt heavier than cloth, should as Sarah unfolded it completely under the harsh fluorescent lighting. The dark stains she had initially dismissed as coffee or food became unmistakably clear in the revealing dawn light. This was blood, human blood, and someone had used it as ink to write a message that made her hands shake as she read the careful script. "They know who you are. Trust no one, especially family. A friend." Sarah looked around the empty diner, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she and Danny were in this glass box surrounded by darkness. The stranger had vanished into the Chicago morning, leaving behind only this cryptic warning that felt like a door opening onto terrors she could not imagine. She folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket, unsure whether she was preserving evidence or hiding from a truth too dangerous to acknowledge. The next 3 days passed with an undercurrent of unease that Sarah could not shake. She found herself checking the locks on their apartment door multiple times before bed, peering through the peephole at shadows that might be nothing more than her imagination. Danny seemed to sense her tension, staying closer than usual and watching her with those perceptive eyes that missed nothing despite his silence. On Thursday evening, while walking home from her morning shift, Sarah noticed the black sedan parked across from their building. The same black sedan that had been behind them at the grocery store the day before, and outside the library where Danny attended his speech therapy sessions. When she quickened her pace, the car's engine started, but it did not follow. Instead, it remained in position like a patient predator. That night, Danny's screams woke her at 3 in the morning. She found him sitting upright in bed, tears streaming down his face, his mouth moving in silent words that would not come. His sketch pad lay open beside him, filled with drawings she had never seen before. Dark figures with obscured faces stood outside windows, watched from cars, lurked in doorways. The artistic skill was remarkable for an 80-year-old, but the subject matter sent ice through her veins. "Danny, sweetie," Sarah whispered, pulling him into her arms. "What are these pictures about?" He pointed to the drawing of their apartment building, then to the shadowy figure positioned across the street. His finger moved to another sketch showing the same figure following a woman and child through a grocery store. The resemblance to their recent experiences was unmistakable. Sarah made a decision that felt both reckless and necessary. During her lunch break the next day, she took the napkin to a clinic where a friend worked as a lab technician. The tests confirmed what she already suspected but had hoped to disprove. The writing had been done in human blood, type O negative, and the paper itself was expensive linen, not the cheap napkins Mel's Diner purchased in bulk. The revelation left her torn between terror and an odd sense of validation. Someone with access to human blood and expensive materials had taken considerable risk to warn her about dangers she did not understand. The stranger in the expensive suit had known something, had tried to protect her in the only way he could without revealing himself completely. Her phone rang as she walked back to work, displaying a number she did not recognize. When she answered, only silence greeted her, followed by the soft click of disconnection. The pattern repeated over the next 2 days. Silent calls at irregular intervals, never quite frequent enough to justify changing her number, but persistent enough to keep her nerves on edge. The break-in happened on Sunday while she and Danny were at the small church they attended sporadically. They returned to find their apartment door ajar, the lock intact but the chain hanging loose. Nothing had been stolen, which somehow made the violation more terrifying than simple theft. Someone had searched their belongings with professional thoroughness, leaving everything in its approximate place but subtly disturbed. Sarah's jewelry box had been emptied and refilled, but the cheap pieces were arranged differently. Danny's school papers were stacked neatly, but in the wrong order. Most disturbing, her mother's old recipe book showed clear signs of examination, pages photographed or copied before being carefully returned to their original sequence. That evening, the Korean stranger returned to Mel's diner. He arrived with companions this time, 3 men who positioned themselves with military precision around the restaurant. One sat near the front window with clear sight lines to the street. Another chose a booth that commanded the kitchen entrance and back door. The third remained standing near the counter, his coat unbuttoned in a way that suggested quick access to concealed weapons. The stranger himself approached Sarah's station with the same controlled movement she remembered, but his demeanor had shifted. The patient observation was gone, replaced by urgent intensity that made her pulse quicken with equal measures of fear and anticipation. "You received my message," he stated rather than asked, taking the same corner booth he had occupied during his first visit. Sarah glanced around at his positioned men, then back to his face. "Your message was written in blood," she said quietly. "Whose blood?" "Mine," he replied without hesitation. It was the only way to ensure you would understand this was not a prank or empty threat. Sarah poured his coffee with hands that barely trembled, proud of her composure despite the circumstances. "Who are you, and why are you warning me about my own family?" Instead of answering, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that looked like a basic cell phone. He slid it across the table, keeping his movements casual in case anyone was watching from outside. "When they come for you, and they will come soon, call the number programmed into that phone immediately." He looked toward Danny, who had fallen asleep over his homework again. "Do not let them take the boy. Do not go anywhere alone. Do not trust anyone who claims to be helping in an official capacity." Sarah stared at the phone, its weight somehow heavier than its physical mass suggested. "What do they want from me? I work at a diner. I have nothing valuable." The stranger's expression grew impossibly grim. "Your father was not who you think he was, Sarah Collins. The life he gave you was built on foundations that are crumbling. The people who killed him are coming to collect what they believe you inherited." Before she could respond, before she could demand explanations for statements that made no sense, he stood and placed exact change on the table again. His men moved simultaneously, converging on the exit with choreographed precision that spoke of extensive training and shared danger. "Remember," he said as he passed her station, "trust no one, especially family. The people who raised you died protecting secrets that others will kill to possess." The diner fell silent except for the eternal buzz of fluorescent lights as the 4 men disappeared into the Chicago night. Sarah stood holding the mysterious phone, staring at Danny's peaceful face, wondering what her father could possibly have done to mark them both for death. The phone had been burning a hole in Sarah's apron pocket for 3 days when the men with guns finally came. Tuesday night brought the usual collection of lost souls to Mel's diner. But Sarah felt the difference the moment the 4 strangers entered at midnight. They moved wrong, too coordinated and purposeful for the random desperation that characterized her typical customers. Their eyes swept the restaurant with professional assessment rather than the glazed exhaustion of night shift workers seeking coffee and refuge. Danny sat in his usual corner booth, having finished his homework hours earlier but remaining close to Sarah as he had every night since the break-in. His sketch pad lay open beside him, filled with new drawings that showed increasing detail about the watchers who had been circling their lives. Tonight's artwork depicted men with weapons, precise enough to suggest Danny had seen such things before, somewhere in the buried memories that his trauma had locked away. The largest of the 4 strangers approached the counter while his companions spread out with military precision. One blocked the front entrance while another positioned himself near the kitchen door. The third remained by the windows, his coat hanging open in a way that suggested quick access to concealed weapons. "You are Sarah Collins," the leader stated rather than asked. His accent carried hints of Eastern Europe, possibly Russian. and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to violence as a business tool. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the phone in her pocket. "Can I get you gentlemen some coffee tonight?" she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "We are not here for refreshments," the man continued, his voice growing sharper with impatience. "You will give us what your father stole, or you and the boy will suffer the consequences of his betrayal." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said truthfully. "My father died in a car accident when I was 16. He was an insurance salesman." The stranger's laugh held no humor. Marcus Chun was many things, but insurance salesman was not among them. He stole $2 billion from people who do not forgive such transgressions. "We know he gave you the access codes before he died." Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. Marcus Chun. Her father's name had been Marcus Collins, not Chun. These men were talking about someone else, had to be talking about someone else. But the leader's eyes remained fixed on her face with the certainty of someone who had done extensive research. "You have 10 seconds to produce what we came for," the man said, reaching inside his coat. "After that, we take the boy and see how much pain you can watch him endure before your memory improves." The mention of Danny crystallized everything for Sarah. Whatever these men wanted, whoever they thought she was, they were threatening to hurt an innocent child. Her hand found the phone just as Danny looked up from his drawings with eyes that had seen too much for his 8 years. The front door burst open before Sarah could dial, and the night exploded into violence. The Korean stranger charged through the entrance with 3 other men, weapons drawn and firing with precision that spoke of extensive training. The restaurant became a war zone in seconds, bullets shattering windows and embedding in walls while Sarah threw herself behind the counter and screamed for Danny to take cover. Through the chaos of gunfire and shouted commands in multiple languages, Sarah watched the Korean stranger move with lethal grace. He was not just protecting her, she realized, but hunting the men who had threatened them. This was personal for him in ways she could not yet understand. "Get down and stay down," he shouted to Sarah as he advanced on the Russian leader, who had taken cover behind an overturned table. "Keep the boy safe." Danny had crawled behind his booth, clutching his sketch pad against his chest like armor. Sarah army crawled across the broken glass and spilled coffee to reach him, wrapping her arms around his small body while bullets continued to fly overhead. The gun battle lasted less than 3 minutes, but felt like hours. When the shooting stopped, 2 of the Russians lay dead near the front door while the other 2 had fled through the kitchen. The Korean stranger and his men remained standing, checking their weapons and scanning for additional threats. "Are you hurt?" the stranger asked Sarah, kneeling beside their hiding place behind the booth. His expensive suit was torn and bloodstained, but he moved without favoring any injuries. "We're okay," Sarah replied, still holding Danny protectively. Who were those men? What did they want? Instead of answering immediately, the stranger's attention focused on Sarah's neck. For the first time, he seemed to notice the antique locket she had worn every day since her parents' death, the one piece of jewelry she never removed because it was her last connection to the mother she barely remembered. "That necklace," he said, his voice carrying a note of recognition that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Where did you get it?" "It was my mother's," Sarah replied instinctively. "The only thing I have left from her." The stranger exchanged glances with one of his men, communicating silently in the way people do when they share dangerous secrets. "May I examine it?" he asked, his tone gentle but urgent. Sarah's hand moved protectively to the locket. It had been her talisman for 8 years, her connection to happier times before tragedy reshaped her world. The thought of removing it felt like losing the last piece of her parents' love. "I promise I will not damage it," the stranger continued. "But I believe that locket contains something worth far more than sentimental value. Something that explains why those men were willing to kill for it." With trembling fingers, Sarah unclasped the chain and handed him the locket. It was beautiful but not obviously valuable, made of what appeared to be silver with delicate engravings that had worn smooth over time. Her mother had always called it a family heirloom, passed down through generations of women who had little else to leave their daughters. The stranger examined the locket with the careful attention of someone who understood its true significance. He found a hidden mechanism Sarah had never noticed, pressing a tiny catch that caused the back panel to slide away with mechanical precision. Inside the hidden compartment lay a micro SD card no larger than a fingernail. This, the stranger said quietly, holding up the tiny device, contains access codes to offshore accounts worth approximately $2 billion. Your father Marcus Chun embezzled this money from some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in Asia over a period of 5 years. They have been hunting for these codes since his death. Sarah felt reality fracturing around her. Marcus Chun. The name meant nothing to her, but the stranger spoke with the certainty of extensive knowledge. My father's name was Marcus Collins, she insisted. He sold insurance in Milwaukee. Marcus Collins was the identity your father assumed when he went into hiding, the stranger explained patiently. Before that, he was Marcus Chun, a financial genius who worked for the Yakuza, Korean syndicates, and Chinese triads simultaneously. He played them against each other while systematically stealing from all of them. Danny had been listening to every word despite his inability to speak. His drawings suddenly made terrible sense. The shadowy figures, the watchers, the sense of danger that had followed them for years. Somewhere in his traumatic memories, he remembered pieces of the truth that Sarah's conscious mind had been too young to retain. The car accident that killed your parents was not an accident, the stranger continued. It was an assassination attempt. Marcus and your mother died before they could reveal where they had hidden the access codes. For 8 years, every criminal organization in 3 countries has been searching for you. Sarah stared at the tiny SD card that had been resting against her heart for 8 years without her knowledge. $2 billion. Enough money to destroy lives, start wars, or reshape the criminal underworld. Her parents had died protecting this secret, and now she was the unwitting keeper of a fortune built on theft and betrayal. There's more you need to know, the stranger said gently. Marcus Chin was not just a thief. He was also a father trying to protect his children from the life he had chosen. You and Danny are not biological siblings. You were both placed with the same foster family as part of his contingency plan. Danny looked up sharply at this revelation, his eyes wide with understanding that transcended his inability to speak. Sarah felt another piece of her world crumble as she realized even their family bond had been constructed to serve her father's protection scheme. Who are you? Sarah asked the stranger, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you know all of this? My name is Lee Sung-min, he replied. My father was murdered by members of my own family when he refused to hunt down the Chin children. I have been searching for you not to claim the money, but to protect you from those who would kill for it. The sirens were growing closer now, and Sung Min's men were already preparing to leave the scene. The police would ask questions that had no safe answers, and staying would only create more danger for everyone involved. You have a choice, Sarah Collins, Sung Min said, helping her to her feet. I can arrange new identities for you and Danny, send you somewhere these people will never find you. Or you can trust me to help you reclaim what your father truly intended, which was not just wealth, but justice for the families these criminals have destroyed. Sarah looked at Danny, who was gathering his sketches with careful precision. His drawings had been trying to tell her the truth for days, showing her dangers she had not wanted to see. Her parents had died protecting secrets that could either destroy them or save them, depending on how those secrets were used. The locket's weight felt different against her palm now, heavy with responsibility rather than just memory. $2 billion worth of stolen money, and the power to bring down criminal empires built on suffering and death. What did my father really want? She asked Sung Min as police lights began reflecting off the shattered windows. He wanted his children to have the choice he never had, Sung Min replied. The choice between running forever or standing and fighting for something better than the world he left behind. The penthouse overlooked Chicago's skyline like a fortress suspended between earth and sky, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city's sprawl of lights and shadows. Sarah stood in the living room that cost more than she would earn in 10 years, holding Danny's hand, while Sung Min's men secured the building with military efficiency. The events at the diner felt like a nightmare from which she kept expecting to wake, but the micro SD card in her trembling fingers provided undeniable proof that her entire life had been built on carefully constructed lies. Sung Min emerged from what appeared to be a high-tech command center, carrying files that looked thick enough to contain government secrets. His expression carried the weight of someone about to shatter whatever remained of another person's innocent worldview. Behind him, Computer screens displayed surveillance footage, financial records, and photographs that Sarah could not yet bring herself to examine closely. "What you discovered tonight is only the beginning," he said, settling the files on the glass coffee table between them. "Your father Marcus Chun was more than a thief, Sarah. He was a criminal mastermind who spent 5 years infiltrating and systematically destroying the financial foundations of 3 major crime syndicates." Sarah sank onto the leather sofa, Danny curling up beside her with the protective instinct that had defined their relationship for 8 years. "How is that possible?" she asked. "I remember him reading bedtime stories and helping with homework. He was just a dad." Sung Min opened the first file, revealing photographs that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The man in the pictures was unmistakably her father, but younger and harder, dressed in expensive suits while shaking hands with men whose faces carried the cold calculation she had seen in tonight's attackers. Marcus Chun in boardrooms, Marcus Chun at crime family gatherings, Marcus Chun counting money in amounts that defied comprehension. He worked for the Yakuza first, providing financial consultation that helped them launder billions through legitimate businesses, Sung Min explained. Then the Korean syndicates recruited him, believing they were stealing him from their Japanese competitors. Finally, the Chinese triads made him an offer that appeared to guarantee his loyalty. What none of them realized was that Marcus was playing all 3 organizations against each other while systematically embezzling from each. The photographs told a story of infiltration and betrayal that spanned continents. Marcus Chun meeting with crime bosses in Tokyo, Seoul, and Hong Kong. Marcus Chun accessing computer systems and transferring funds. Marcus Chun building the kind of wealth that could reshape the criminal underworld or destroy it entirely, depending on who controlled the access codes. But Sarah's attention was caught by a family photograph near the bottom of the pile. A younger version of her father stood beside a woman who was not her mother, surrounded by 4 children who shared his features but were strangers to her memory. 3 boys and a girl, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 14, all smiling with the innocent happiness of children who believed their family was normal. "Those were your brothers and sister," Sung Min said gently, following her gaze to the photograph. "Michael, David, Anthony, and Lisa Chun. They lived with Marcus and your stepmother in San Francisco until you were 4 years old." Sarah's hands shook as she studied the faces of siblings she had never known existed. The oldest boy had her father's determined expression, while the girl shared Sarah's eyes and stubborn chin. They looked like a real family, complete and happy, nothing like the fragments of memories she carried from her early childhood. "What happened to them?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would be devastating. Sung Min's expression grew impossibly grim as he opened the second file. Crime scene photographs spilled across the table, images so brutal that he quickly gathered them back together before Sarah could see the full extent of the violence. "The Yakuza discovered Marcus's deception in March 2009, he said quietly. "They sent a message by eliminating his entire family in a single night." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. 4 children murdered because of their father's crimes. Brothers and a sister she would never meet, never know, never mourn properly because she had not even known they existed. The weight of their loss settled into her chest alongside the guilt of being the only survivor. "You survived because Marcus had hidden you with a foster family 6 months earlier," Sung Min continued. He knew the discovery was inevitable and had begun moving his most precious assets to safety. "You and the access codes were his insurance policy for a future he would not live to see." Danny had been listening to every word despite his inability to respond verbally. His sketch pad lay open beside him, and Sarah noticed that his recent drawings included additional children, figures she had assumed were imaginary friends, but now realized might be recovered memories of the siblings he had lost alongside her. "Wait," Sarah said, studying Danny's artwork with new understanding. "If Danny isn't my biological brother, how does he have memories of my family?" Sung Min opened the third file, revealing documents that looked like official government reports. "Danny's birth name was Daniel Park," he explained. "His father was James Park, Marcus Chin's partner in the embezzlement operation. When the crime families began closing in, Marcus arranged for both of your placements with the same foster family. You became siblings through shared protection rather than shared blood." Sarah looked at Danny with a mixture of love and newfound understanding. He had lost his own father and siblings in the same massacre that had taken her family. Their bond had been forged not just by foster care placement, but by mutual survival and shared trauma that neither of them had been old enough to fully comprehend. The files contained more devastating revelations. The micro SD card did not just hold access codes to stolen money, but detailed evidence of corruption, money laundering, and murder that implicated hundreds of criminals across 3 countries. Marcus Chun had not just stolen billions. He had documented every transaction, every crime, every piece of evidence needed to destroy the organizations that had trusted him. Your father was building a case, Sung Min explained. He planned to turn over everything to federal authorities in exchange for protection for his children. The massacre happened 3 weeks before his scheduled meeting with the FBI. But perhaps the most shocking revelation waited in the final file. Sarah's foster parents, Robert and Linda Collins, had not been random placement choices. They were deep-cover federal agents assigned to protect the Chin children while the investigation continued. The car accident that had taken their lives was not an accident at all, but an assassination ordered by criminals who had finally tracked down their targets. For 8 years, you have been living under the protection of an operation that officially never existed, Sung Min said. The agents who raised you died trying to protect federal evidence worth billions of dollars and testimony that could dismantle criminal empires. Sarah felt the final pieces of her constructed reality crumble away. Even her parents' love had been a professional assignment, their care the result of duty rather than choice. She was truly alone in ways she had never imagined possible, the sole guardian of secrets that had already cost 8 lives and would likely cost more. But you said your father was murdered too, Sarah said to Sung Min. How does that connect to my family's story? Sung Min's expression carried years of pain as he answered. My father Lee Jun was a respected member of the Korean syndicate until Marcus Chin's betrayal was discovered. When the crime families began hunting for the missing money and surviving children, my uncle ordered my father to lead the search. My father refused, saying children should not pay for their parents' crimes. Sarah watched Sung Min's face as he continued, seeing the grief that matched her own. My uncle killed my father that night and took control of our family's operations. I have spent the last 8 years gathering evidence against him while searching for you, not to claim the stolen money, but to finish what both our fathers started. The parallel tragedies created an unexpected connection between them. 2 children whose fathers had chosen different sides of the same conflict, but had paid similar prices for their decisions. Sarah realized that Sung Min's protection came not from obligation or greed, but from shared loss and a desire for justice that transcended personal gain. Danny had been drawing throughout the conversation, his artistic skills capturing details that his voice could not express. His latest sketch showed 2 children holding hands while shadowy figures fell around them, a metaphor for survival through mutual protection that perfectly captured their current situation. What happens now? Sarah asked, looking at the files full of evidence that could either save them or destroy them. Do we run, or do we use this information to fight back? Sung Min gathered the photographs carefully, treating them with the respect due to evidence of multiple tragedies. That choice belongs to you, Sarah Chun. You can disappear with new identities and live quietly while the criminals who killed our families continue their operations. Or you can help me use your father's evidence to give our dead families the justice they never received. Sarah looked at Danny, whose eyes held understanding far beyond his years. At the photos of siblings she would never know. At the evidence of her father's complex legacy of love, crime, and attempted redemption. The locket around her neck no longer felt like a simple inheritance, but like a responsibility that connected her to everyone who had died protecting its secrets. For 8 years, she had survived by staying invisible, working quietly, and avoiding attention that might bring danger. But invisibility had not protected her family, and running would not honor their sacrifice or prevent other families from suffering similar losses. The weight of decision felt enormous, but for the first time since the nightmare began, Sarah felt something stronger than fear growing in her chest. Her father had tried to choose justice over crime, her foster parents had died protecting federal evidence, and Sung Min's father had refused to harm children despite the personal cost. Maybe it was time to stop running from the family legacy and start using it to build something better than what they had inherited. The decision crystallized in Sarah's mind as she watched the sunrise paint Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and crimson. Sung Min had spent the night explaining extraction protocols, safe house locations, and the carefully crafted new identities that could give her and Danny a chance at normal lives far from the criminal underworld that had claimed their families. Federal marshals were prepared to relocate them within hours, complete with backgrounds, employment, and educational records that would allow them to disappear completely. Instead, Sarah picked up the micro SD card and turned it slowly between her fingers, feeling the weight of $2 billion and 8 years of evidence against the most dangerous criminal organizations in 3 countries. Running would keep them safe, but it would also ensure that her siblings' murders went unpunished, that her foster parents' sacrifice meant nothing, and that other families would suffer the same losses while the killers continued operating with impunity. "I want to learn everything my father knew," she told Sung Min as he finished securing the penthouse for extended occupation. "I want to understand these organizations, their weaknesses, and how to use the information he gathered. If we're going to fight them, I need to become someone they can't dismiss as just a grieving daughter." Sung Min studied her face with the careful attention of someone evaluating a potential partner in extremely dangerous endeavors. "Training will be difficult," he warned. "These people will kill you without hesitation if they discover what you're planning. Once you begin this path, there will be no returning to the innocent life you've known." Sarah looked at Danny, who had been quietly drawing throughout their conversation. His latest sketch showed 2 adults and a child standing together while shadow figures retreated into darkness, a remarkably sophisticated metaphor for the alliance they were forming. "That innocent life was an illusion anyway," she replied. "At least this way, we choose how the story ends." The transformation began immediately. Sung Min arranged for specialists who taught Sarah everything from computer security to hand-to-hand combat, treating her education with the seriousness of someone preparing for war. She learned to decode her father's encrypted files, discovering layer upon layer of evidence documenting crimes spanning decades and continents. Each revelation strengthened her resolve while deepening her understanding of the scope of their enemy's operations. Danny's healing progressed alongside Sarah's training. Sung Min had arranged for Dr. Elena Vasquez, a trauma specialist who worked with crime victims, to provide therapy sessions that used art and play to help Danny process memories he had been too young to understand. Gradually, the boy began speaking again, first in whispers to his drawings, then in quiet conversations with Sarah, and finally in longer discussions about the fragments of memory that had haunted his nightmares. The breakthrough came during a session where Danny was painting scenes from his early childhood. "I remember the loud noises," he said suddenly, his voice still soft but clear. "When the bad men came to our house that night. Mama Linda tried to hide me in the closet, but I saw them hurt her." Sarah's heart broke as she realized Danny had witnessed their foster parents' murder, carrying that trauma silently for years while she assumed his mutism was simply a response to their deaths. Dr. Vasquez helped him work through the memories, transforming them from sources of terror into evidence that could help identify their parents' killers. Meanwhile, Sarah's intelligence and her father's detailed records began yielding strategic advantages. Marcus Chun had documented not just financial crimes, but personal information about crime family members, their relationships, rivalries, and individual motivations. Sarah learned to identify which lieutenants could be turned against their superiors, which operations were vulnerable to exposure, and how to use the stolen money as leverage rather than simply treasure to be protected. Working closely with Sung Min during 18-hour days, Sarah discovered that their partnership extended beyond shared trauma and mutual goals. His patience during her training, his genuine care for Danny's recovery, and his willingness to trust her with sensitive information created a foundation of respect that gradually deepened into something more personal. Their first kiss happened during a late-night strategy session, spontaneous and unexpected, followed by conversations that revealed how their different perspectives strengthened their collective planning. Sarah's first major victory came when she identified a financial vulnerability in the operations of Sung Min's uncle, Lee Junho, who had murdered Sung Min's father and now controlled the Korean syndicate's Chicago operations. Using her father's hidden accounts, she orchestrated a complex series of transactions that appeared to be routine money laundering but actually redirected millions of dollars into accounts controlled by Junho's rivals within the organization. The beauty of the plan lay in its subtlety. Rather than simply stealing the money, Sarah made it appear that Junho himself was skimming from operations and funneling profits to potential competitors. Within weeks, internal suspicion and paranoia began weakening his control while strengthening the positions of lieutenants who could eventually be turned against him. Sung-min watched Sarah work with a combination of admiration and concern. "You have your father's mind for strategy," he told her after she successfully manipulated 3 different crime families into a territorial dispute that weakened all of them. "But remember that these victories make you a more valuable target. They will escalate their efforts to capture or kill you." His warning proved prophetic when assassins breached their safe house on a quiet Thursday evening. Sarah had been reviewing financial records while Danny worked on homework, the domestic normalcy providing temporary relief from their dangerous reality. The attack came without warning. Professional killers who had somehow bypassed Sung-min's security systems and gained access to the building. Sarah's training took over without conscious thought. When the first assassin kicked down their apartment door, she was already moving, grabbing Danny and pushing him toward the reinforced panic room while drawing the handgun Sung-min had taught her to use. The muscle memory of countless hours of practice guided her movements as she engaged the attackers with precision that surprised even her. The first man died when Sarah put 3 bullets center mass, her father's strategic mind combining with months of combat training to create deadly efficiency. The second assassin hesitated when he saw his partner fall, giving Sarah time to position herself between Danny and the remaining threats. By the time Sung-min and his men arrived, drawn by the gunfire, Sarah had eliminated 2 attackers and wounded a third. Standing over the bodies of men who had come to kill her and Danny, Sarah felt the final transformation complete itself. The frightened waitress who had counted tips and worried about rent payments was gone, replaced by someone capable of lethal violence in defense of family and justice. The change should have terrified her, but instead it felt like stepping into a role she had been unconsciously preparing for her entire life. Danny emerged from the panic room carrying his sketch pad, his young face serious but unafraid. His latest drawing showed Sarah standing protectively over a small figure while defeated enemies lay scattered around them, capturing the reality of what she had become with artistic insight that transcended his years. "You did what you had to do," Sung-min said quietly, surveying the scene with professional assessment. His expression carried pride alongside concern, recognizing that Sarah had crossed a line from which there could be no retreat. Sarah looked at the evidence of her capacity for violence, then at Danny, who had spoken more words in the past month than in the previous year combined, at Sung-min, whose partnership had given her the tools and support needed to become someone who could fight back rather than simply survive, at the files full of evidence that could bring down criminal empires if used correctly. The innocent life was over, but the meaningful life had just begun. Her father's legacy would finally serve justice rather than just survival, and the people who had murdered 2 families would learn what it cost to underestimate a daughter's determination to protect what remained of her chosen family. Tomorrow, they would begin the final phase of operations against Lee Junho and his allies. Tonight, Sarah Collins ceased to exist completely, replaced by Sarah Chun, inheritor of secrets and avenger of the innocent, ready to use every weapon her father had left her to build a world where children did not pay for their parents' crimes with their lives. The final assault began at dawn on a Tuesday that would reshape the criminal landscape of 3 cities. Sarah and Sung-min had spent 6 weeks turning Lee Junho's own organization against him, using her father's evidence and financial manipulation to create the kind of internal warfare that destroyed criminal empires from within. The beauty of their strategy lay not in direct confrontation, but in making Junho's paranoia and greed the weapons of his own destruction. Sarah initiated the financial component from Sung-min's command center, her fingers flying across keyboards as she executed transactions that would simultaneously bankrupt Junho's operations while enriching his rivals. The stolen billions became leverage points, moving through shell companies and legitimate businesses to create the appearance that Junho was embezzling from his own crime family. Within hours, his most trusted lieutenants would receive evidence suggesting their boss was planning to eliminate them while keeping their shared profits. Danny sat beside Sarah during the operation, his recovery so complete that he had become their unofficial intelligence analyst, using his artistic skills to create detailed maps and organizational charts that helped them track enemy movements. His latest drawings showed the crime family structure with remarkable accuracy, including safe houses, meeting locations, and personal relationships that Sarah's digital surveillance had missed. The turned lieutenants moved with surgical precision across Chicago's South Side, eliminating Junho's loyal supporters, while federal agents, armed with Marcus Chin's evidence, arrested corrupt officials who had been protecting the criminal operations. Sarah watched the coordinated strikes through surveillance cameras, seeing 8 years of planning come together in a symphony of justice that honored every victim of the organizations her father had infiltrated. But Junho himself remained elusive until Sung Min's intelligence network located him at a warehouse complex near the Chicago River, surrounded by the last dozen men still loyal to his leadership. The final confrontation would require direct action, and Sarah insisted on participating despite Sung Min's concerns about putting her in additional danger. "You have become everything your father hoped you would be," Sung Min told her as they prepared for the assault. "But I cannot bear the thought of losing you when we are so close to ending this nightmare." Sarah checked her weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who had discovered her capacity for necessary violence. "We finish this together," she replied. "My father started this war to protect his children. I'm going to end it the same way." The warehouse district felt like a concrete graveyard in the pre-dawn darkness, industrial buildings rising around them like monoliths to forgotten prosperity. Sung Min's men positioned themselves with military precision, while Sarah and Danny remained in the armored vehicle that served as their mobile command center. The plan called for negotiations first, giving Junho the opportunity to surrender in exchange for lenient treatment. But everyone understood that a man who had murdered his own brother was unlikely to accept defeat gracefully. The negotiation lasted exactly 3 minutes before gunfire erupted from the warehouse windows. Junho had chosen death over dishonor, and his remaining men fought with the desperate fury of people who understood they would not survive capture. Sarah watched Sung Min advance toward the building, coordinating his team's movements while staying exposed to enemy fire longer than tactical wisdom suggested. When the sniper's bullet caught Sung Min in the shoulder, sending him stumbling toward cover that would not protect him from the elevated position, Sarah's training took over without conscious decision. She abandoned the safety of the armored vehicle, sprinting across open ground while laying down suppressing fire that forced the sniper to reposition. Her father's strategic mind guided her movements as she flanked the warehouse, using industrial equipment for cover while advancing on the sniper's nest. The kill shot came from an angle the sniper never expected, Sarah's bullet finding its target just as he prepared to finish Sung Min. She had saved the man she loved using skills inherited from a father who had tried to choose justice over crime, completing a circle that connected 3 generations of people who had paid terrible prices for standing against organized evil. Inside the warehouse, Junho made his final stand surrounded by crates that contained evidence of human trafficking operations spanning multiple continents. As Sung Min advanced despite his wounded shoulder, the older man's desperation transformed into the kind of vindictive revelation that dying criminals often used as their final weapon. "Your precious Marcus Chun is not dead," Junho snarled as blood ran from wounds that would prove fatal. "He has been hiding in Thailand for 8 years, living comfortably while children died for his crimes. Ask your girlfriend how it feels to know her father abandoned her to fight his battles while he enjoyed retirement in paradise." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, but before she could process their full implications, Danny's voice rang out across the warehouse with clarity that marked his complete recovery from years of traumatic silence. "That's not true," he said firmly. "Papa Marcus tried to come back for us. I remember him calling Mama Linda and crying because the bad men wouldn't let him return safely." Danny's recovered memories provided the missing pieces of their family's story. Marcus Chun had not abandoned his surviving children, but had been forced into hiding when federal protection failed and corrupt officials leaked his location to crime families seeking revenge. His 8 years of exile had been spent gathering additional evidence while staying alive long enough to reunite with the children he had never stopped trying to protect. With Junho's death, The last major threat to their safety ended, but Sarah's need to understand her father's choices had just begun. Using the resources of Sung Min's now legitimate business empire, they traced Marcus Chun to a small fishing village in Thailand, where he had been living under constant threat while documenting additional crimes committed by the organization seeking his death. The reunion took place on a beach where the sun set over water that reflected Sarah's childhood dreams of safety and family. Marcus Chun had aged dramatically during his 8 years of exile, but his eyes still held the love that had motivated every impossible choice he had made since becoming a father. The conversation that followed lasted 3 days, filled with explanations, apologies, and the kind of forgiveness that can only exist between family members who have survived unimaginable loss together. Sarah learned that her father's original plan had been to gather evidence, testify, and accept whatever prison sentence allowed his children to grow up safely. The massacre that had killed her siblings and his partner had destroyed that possibility, leaving him with only the desperate hope that his surviving children would someday use his evidence to finish what he had started. 6 months later, Sarah Chun and Lee Sung-min were married in a ceremony that honored both their Korean and American heritage while celebrating the kind of love that could transform criminal empires into forces for justice. Danny served as ring bearer, his recovered voice strong and clear as he read a poem he had written about families that chose each other rather than accepting the roles forced upon them by circumstances beyond their control. The wedding announcement included their plans to establish the Chin Foundation, dedicated to helping children separated from families by violence while providing support for crime victims seeking justice through legal rather than criminal means. Sung Min's inherited criminal empire had been completely transformed into legitimate businesses focused on protecting trafficking victims and supporting immigrant families struggling to build new lives in foreign countries. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation appeared in the chain of 24-hour diners they opened throughout Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods. Each location provided jobs for people society had written off, safe spaces for families struggling to survive, and the kind of genuine care that Sarah had learned during her years serving desperate customers at Mel's Diner. The original location became their flagship, renovated but retaining the booth where their love story had begun with a cup of coffee and a warning written in blood. The first customer served at the new Mel's Diner was a young mother working multiple jobs to support her children, exhausted and counting every dollar while trying to maintain hope for a better future. Sarah poured her coffee personally, remembering what it felt like to wonder if tomorrow would bring enough money for rent and medicine, and left a note with the check that contained not a warning this time, but an offer of employment, health care, and the kind of support that could transform struggle into strength. As Sarah watched the young mother's tears of gratitude, she thought about the journey that had brought her from frightened waitress to confident business owner, from isolated victim to surrounded by chosen family, from counting tips to distributing hope. The micro SD card that had held $2 billion now funded programs that helped thousands of families escape the kind of poverty and desperation that made them vulnerable to criminal exploitation. Danny, now 11 and completely recovered, sat in their corner booth working on homework while periodically looking up to smile at Sarah and Sung Min as they served customers who reminded them of their own former struggles. His latest drawings showed families of all colors and backgrounds sitting together around tables filled with food and conversation, his artistic vision capturing the kind of world they were building one meal at a time. Watching this transformation of tragedy into hope, Sarah understood that love really could conquer criminal empires, not through violence alone, but through the patient work of building something better than what had existed before. Her father's legacy had finally become what he had truly intended: protection for the innocent, justice for the victims, and hope for families who refused to let circumstances define their futures. The story that had begun with a $0 tip and a blood-stained warning had become something far more powerful. A love story that proved ordinary people could choose to become extraordinary when they fought for each other rather than just themselves. And in diners across Chicago where desperate people found refuge in the middle of their darkest nights, that love continued expanding outward like ripples in water, touching lives and changing stories one cup of coffee at a time. I hope Sarah and Sung Min's journey from danger to love, from crime to justice, touched something in your own story about choosing hope over fear and family over isolation. Share in the comments what this tale of transformation meant to you, and whether you've ever experienced the kind of love that changes everything about how you see the world and your place in it.